Okay, I'm going to get started with this next topic of enlightenment. What is enlightenment? This is a topic that you'll need to understand in order to know this mental state and what this mental state is, so that then you can actually make your way to it. So I'm going to walk you guys through helping you to understand this mental state of enlightenment. So first, to be able to understand this mental state of enlightenment, it's helpful to understand that it's a challenge to understand this mental state of enlightenment, because it's kind of like if I sat here and I described to you what chocolate ice cream tastes like and you've never actually tasted chocolate ice cream. It will be very challenging for you to understand what chocolate ice cream tastes like because you've never actually tasted it. It's not until you actually experience enlightenment that you're going to understand what enlightenment is 100%. But after our talk today, you'll definitely understand more about enlightenment afterwards than you do now. But just understand that you're not going to understand everything about what enlightenment is at the end of our conversation. Because it's like I mentioned, it's like kind of like trying to explain to you what chocolate ice cream tastes like. If I sat here and tried to explain to you what chocolate ice cream tastes like and you never actually tasted it, you'll have a certain appreciation for what it's like, but you won't fully understand what chocolate ice cream tastes like until you actually taste it yourself. So as you're making your way closer and closer to enlightenment, you'll get more and more familiar with what it is, but you're definitely going to know more about it after our conversation than you do right now. Okay. So what enlightenment is it's a mental state that you attain during this life, or you can also attain it at death as well. But ideally, you would attain enlightenment in this life, because then you enjoy the rest of this life with the enlightened mental state. What this mental state is where you've purified the mind of the causes and conditions that are producing things like anger, sadness, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety, loneliness, boredom, shyness, resentment, jealousy. All of these are eliminated from the mind. The mind will be peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. The mind is steady and stable. It's unshakable. It doesn't matter what's happening in your life, your mind won't be shaken up. Where right now, that's not the case. You experience maybe the death of your mother or your life partner, or you have a significant change in your job, or if a tree fell on your house, maybe you'd be shaken up by that perhaps. This is things that's going to happen when the mind is unenlightened. But by the time you get to enlightenment, all of these things could potentially occur, but your mind's going to be steady and stable and unshakable. So the mind is going to be concentrated, steady, and unshakable. The mind will be calm and relaxed, but yet it'll be attentive and alert. Oftentimes, when we think about calm and relaxed, we think about, I'm so calm, like kind of like a vegetated state. But this isn't the case with the enlightened mental state. With enlightenment, the mind is actually calm and relaxed, but it's attentive and it's alert, it's sharp, because you've actually purified the mind of the pollutions that are causing it to be muddled in the way that you might have a lack of memory and things like this. So again, this can be attained during this life or it can be attained at death. And having experienced enlightenment at uh, either during this life or at death, there won't be any rebirth. And as I mentioned to you, I suggest you set that whole cycle of rebirth to the side. I don't really talk about it too much in a beginning class like this, but just understand that that is part of what the Buddha taught. And as I shared yesterday, there's a reason why he taught that. But it's best to just kind of set that aside at the beginning of your journey so that you can learn the core central teachings. And then in the future, you'll be able to approach the cycle of rebirth and be able to independently verify it. Now, for someone who's gotten to enlightenment, they won't experience rebirth. The mind will be free of craving, anger, and ignorance. This is what we're going to talk about on the, what is that? My days are all switched. On the third day, on Saturday morning, I'll be explaining what is the three unwholesome roots or the three poisons. And we talked about it a little bit yesterday. These are the high level description of what's going on in the unenlightened mind. And you will have purified the mind of that in order to be able to make your way to enlightenment. So while enlightenment itself is a mental state where the mind is completely peaceful and joyful, the path to enlightenment is a purification of the mind, where you're purifying the mind of the causes and conditions that are producing these discontent feelings like anger, sadness, frustration, and others. Enlightenment is not happiness or ultimate bliss. Sometimes you'll hear people that will describe enlightenment as this ultimate bliss or this extreme happiness. While there's plenty of happiness in the enlightened mental state, I don't explain it that way initially because it can kind of be misleading. Because you know what happiness you've experienced happiness. You know what that is. It arises, it changes, and it fades away. The joy that you're experiencing in the enlightened mental state, it's persistent. The reason why your happiness right now is only temporary, that it arises, changes, and fades away, is because it's conditional happiness. It's based on some condition. If you get a raise at work, you might be happy or excited. Or if you buy a new car, you might be happy or excited. Or maybe you meet a new friend, you'll be happy or excited. Or if it's sunny outside, you might be happy or excited. But then, because those things change and you've formed your feeling based on that thing, now your happiness will change too. So this is why, like when you see it sunny outside, you get so happy, but then when it rains, you'll get sad or frustrated because you've based your happiness on the sun, and the sun is not permanent. So that's why your happiness isn't permanent. Or if you get so happy with that brand new car that you have, well, when you first got it, you're so happy, but then when it changes over time and it deteriorates, you're not happy anymore. So that's because of the conditionality of these happy feelings, that the mind is forming this happiness based on a condition. By the time you get to enlightenment, you're experiencing unconditioned happiness. You're beyond the conditionality of the arising and changing and fading away of feelings, that your mind no longer forms its inner feelings based on some condition. So in the unenlightened state, it's kind of like if this condition is met, this condition is met, this condition is met, this condition is met, and this condition is met, then you'll be happy, right? But then when those things aren't met, then you'll be sad or frustrated or annoyed or agitated or something like that. But when you get rid of all of that and you train your mind to no longer form its inner feelings based on this thing, then you can experience permanent happiness. It's called unconditional happiness or unconditioned joy. But there's some people who describe enlightenment as happiness or ultimate bliss. And when you talk to these people, what they'll typically tell you is that an enlightened being still experiences sadness or anger or frustration or agitation or annoyance. What they're actually doing is they think that they're enlightened and they're describing their current mental state to you, and they're describing that as enlightenment. Because when you get into something called the jhanas are 4 preliminary phases that you experience before you get to the first stage of enlightenment. There's 4 stages of enlightenment. And as you're making your way to the first stage, there's these preliminary phases that you experience in the mind. These are enhanced qualities of mind. And when you get to the first jhana, there is this ultimate bliss. There's this excitement in the mind, but it's still temporary. It's not long lasting. It can last for several hours or several days even, but it's still not actually permanent. So people who move into the jhanas, sometimes they think they're enlightened because those enhanced qualities that you experience in the jhanas, it's like night and day between what you experience when you're off the path to enlightenment to when you actually get to enlightenment. So people experiencing those jhanas, which is very different than what they've ever experienced at any time in other parts of their life, they think they're enlightened and they're describing what they're experiencing as enlightenment. So they will tell you that enlightenment is ultimate bliss, or they will say that enlightened beings still experience frustration or sadness or annoyance or all of these other things. But I can assure you that that's not the case. An enlightened being doesn't experience any of those things, but some people are just misunderstanding. So that's why you'll hear some people refer to enlightenment as ultimate bliss, and they'll say that an enlightened being still experiences sadness or anger or frustration. But that's not the case. You're not going to do all this work to then continue to experience anger and sadness and frustration. These are just enhanced qualities of mind that are like night and day. These jhanas, it's like, wow. But what you're experiencing in the jhanas, it pales in comparison to what you're going to experience when you get to the actual enlightened mental state. So this is why I don't describe enlightenment as happiness, because oftentimes people think of it as conditional happiness. That's what you're actually experiencing. But by the time you get to enlightenment, you're beyond the conditional experiences where your mind's just permanently in the mental state of being peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. So this is the advantages of getting to enlightenment, is that yes, the mind will be peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. You're going to hear me say that probably a bunch of different times over the course of your journey to enlightenment, because it's so important to understand that. But there's also going to be this high degree of focus, concentration, clarity, and deep memory, because the mind is now performing optimally. You've eliminated the pollutions of mind, and now the mind can perform optimally. The reason why you struggle with lack of concentration and frustration and all these other things is the mind's polluted with certain pollutions that I'm going to introduce you to here in a moment. But by the time you purify your mind of that, It's no longer experiencing that. That's why there's the focus, concentration, clarity, and deep memory. You'll no longer experience any of these discontent feelings. You're also going to hear me say those a whole bunch of times between now and the time you actually get to enlightenment. These are the things that the mind is eliminating. And then you'll notice that the mind has this deep wisdom about the path to enlightenment. So there's going to be this deep wisdom in this politeness, this kindness, this friendliness and respect. And you'll be able to practice that with everybody. Right now, you probably can't do that. There's probably certain people that you get along with, and there's certain people that you just have the toughest time with, right? And because of that, oftentimes people think it's those other people that are the problem. You might perceive it that way, but actually it's within your own mind. When you clean up your own mind, you'll be able to be polite, kind, friendly, respectful to everybody around you. But right now, the mind just can't do that because of these pollutions that are there. But when you purify the mind of that, you'll be able to be polite, kind, friendly, respectful to everybody. And because of that, your personal and professional relationships will be really blossoming. You'll see that they're at ease, that you don't have difficulties and struggles. Like right now, there's probably certain relationships that you struggle in. And that's normal for a mind that is unenlightened, but you can gradually evolve and gradually develop where you can get to the point where that's not the case, where you can experience blossoming relationships and they can be at ease. And it just takes you cultivating wisdom and training of the mind to be able to experience that. In order to get to enlightenment, there are certain core central teachings to focus on at the beginning. And in this course, I'm pretty much going to be teaching you all of these things. These are the core central teachings to focus on at the very beginning. There's other things that you need to learn beyond this in order to get to enlightenment, but this is what you typically focus on when you first get started. Is you need to understand the three universal truths, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, and the five precepts. I'm going to be teaching you all of those thoroughly in this particular course. Then there's the Brahma Viharas. These are four healthy mental states that you're cultivating in order to antidote certain symptoms that are in your mind. I'm not going to actually teach those to you in this course, but I do introduce it at one point tomorrow. You'll hear me kind of introduce it. I won't call it the Brahma Viharas. And if you don't know what the Brahma Viharas are, you might not even realize that I'm teaching it, but I will kind of like touch on it at a certain point. But then there's chapters in the book. There's other programs that I teach where I do teach the Brahma Viharas. There's another course after this called Harmony in Relationships that I teach it in there. I teach it in the group learning program and I teach it in other things. So you would need to know these four healthy mental states in order to train your mind to get to enlightenment. And that's something you're usually focusing on towards the beginning. Then there's something called the 10 fetters. I'm going to introduce you to those here in a moment. This is something that you're going to need to ultimately know and understand. Today, all you need is an introduction to this, but later on, you're going to need to know these in a lot more detail. Then you're going to need to know the 7 factors of enlightenment. I'll explain those to you. And then there's extensive meditation training. And as you guys hear me say, is you're never interested in believing any of these teachings. You would like to learn, you would like to reflect and practice. You're not believing, you're independently verifying. And I'm going to show you how to do that as we get started tomorrow with the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. Any questions on any of this so far? Yes, sir. If you can get a mic or we can pass one back to you.
I'm sure this will be covered more in depth later, but a question I had was, in the earlier stages of enlightenment, would you say that there can sometimes you can sort of hit a wall, in which you have a base knowledge of how to proceed forward and how to get to enlightenment, but at the same time, like with this like newfound knowledge, your ego can sometimes become sort of inflated, and you can start to judge others for not being on that same path, or investing as much time into their path to enlightenment.
Yes, absolutely. The ego is made up of 2 different things, which I'll introduce you to here in a moment. And we teach you how to dissolve the ego, how to eliminate it, because you need to eliminate that arrogance, that pride, that measuring and comparing, putting yourself above people or below people, the boastfulness. So the ego is in there always trying to convince you that you're more enlightened than you really are. Because if the ego convinces you that you're more enlightened than you really are, the ego can stick around for longer. It's kind of like a tenant who's renting and never paying you any rent, and it just keeps trying to find an excuse and a reason to stick around. That's the way the ego does. It tries to convince you that you're more enlightened than you really are so it can stick around for longer. So the ego, the predominant fetter is called conceit. You're going to see that it's a higher fetter, and that's not eliminated typically until much later in your journey. So you got to be really vigilant of this ego because it's going to constantly be trying to tell you that you're better and wiser and more enlightened than you really are, and that just allows it to stick around for longer.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So, introducing you guys to the 10 fetters. This is just an introduction. This is like the underlying engine of what the Buddha is teaching you to dismantle. He's teaching you to eradicate these pollutions out of your mind. Right now, all you need is an introduction to them, but then understand that everything that he's teaching you, whether it's the Eightfold Path or the 5 precepts or meditation training or any of these other things, it's guiding you to eliminate these 10 fetters. The reason why they're called fetters is that during the lifetime of the Buddha, if you were a prisoner and they were trying to keep you confined to a certain area, they would attach a fetter to your ankle. This was like a shackle and a chain and a ball, and they would keep you in a field and it would keep you confined to that area. Where today we put prisoners in jail cells or prison cells, back then they would put this fetter on your ankle and it would keep you confined to a certain area. So when the Buddha discovered these 10 pollutions, he referred to it as a fetter because it's keeping you trapped in this unenlightened state, continuing to experience this anger and frustration and difficult relationships and the struggles in life over and over and over again. But when you purify the mind of these 10 fetters or these 10 pollutions or the taints or the defilements, when you eradicate these out of the mind, that's where the brightness and the radiance and the brilliance, the cheerfulness, the gladness of the enlightened mind shines through. And that's why it's happening gradually, that you're gradually diminishing these pollutions, and then the qualities of enlightenment are gradually going to increase over time. So I'll introduce you to these, let you ask any questions that you like, but just understand that you don't need an in-depth understanding of these right now. There's other courses and programs and retreats that I teach where I spend like an hour, hour and a half on each individual fetter. I explain to you what it is, what the symptoms of it are. I explain to you how to eliminate it and how to know that you've actually eliminated it. But if you didn't understand the core central teachings, the foundational stuff, you can't ever get to those kinds of things. But even as I'm explaining to you these fetters here in an introductory fashion, you'll be able to see that your mind has these fetters. You'll be able to confirm it even with some of the basic things that I share with you. You can confirm that your mind has these. So the first one is called personal existence view. What this is where the mind has confusion or misunderstanding, that it thinks that this body or this mind is you and who you are as a person. So the mind will cling to a certain self-image or a self-identity, thinking that this is who you are. And the mind will want to be perceived by others in a certain way. So if you ever spilled something on your clothing in a social situation and you were embarrassed by that, that is your personal existence view. That's the mind clinging to this particular body, wanting others to perceive you a certain way. And as long as you're being perceived that way, you feel happy. But then when you spill spaghetti sauce or chocolate ice cream on your clothing, now you'll experience embarrassment or frustration because you're not being perceived by others the way you want. Or if you have a wrinkle or a mole or a pimple or gray hair or start losing your hair or something like this, you might feel like less of a person because now you're not being perceived by others the way that you want to be perceived. You might look in the mirror and be shaken up by that wrinkle or that mole or that pimple. Or if you were like me when I was a kid, I used to get out the gel and the mousse and run it through my hair and try to get every little hair in exactly the right spot before I go out to school. I would sometimes miss the bus on the way to school because I was spending so much time in the mirror trying to get all those hairs in exactly the right spot. That's the mind wanting to be perceived by other people in a certain way. And you don't feel comfortable going outside until you do that. If you've put on clothes, looked in the mirror, and you're like, no, that's not how I want to look today. And you went and got other clothes and you put those on, you looked in the mirror and you're like, all right, perfect. I can go out looking like this. This is the mind's personal existence view. And as long as you have this, in certain situations, you'll be happy and excited. Someone says, wow, you're so handsome. You're so beautiful. Ah, they're talking about me. But then it's only a matter of time before someone says something negative or degrading or disparaging about this body. And now you'll be frustrated or agitated or annoyed. So this is coming from the confusion or the misunderstanding that this body is who you are. But then there's a self-identity in your mind that you might be clinging to. This can be around your culture, your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, your nationality, your job or occupation. You might be clinging to this I am, like I am American, or I am Indian, or I am Chinese, or I am a Buddhist teacher, or I am a police officer, I am a mom, I am a dad, I am a husband, I am a wife, any of these kinds of things. I am a boyfriend, I am a girlfriend. And if, as long as you cling to this, you're going to experience difficulties and struggles along the way, thinking that this is who you are. So if you've ever been in a relationship with a boyfriend or girlfriend and you have the perception in your mind that I am a boyfriend, I am a girlfriend, when you guys were together, you felt fine. But when you guys broke up and now you're single, your mind doesn't identify with I am single. And now you might have felt like uncomfortable in that situation. You might have felt like you wanted to hurry up and get right back into another relationship. The mind felt like that was the way to solve this uncomfortableness, is to kind of reassume this identity, this role that your mind was holding on to. Or if you've ever had a job or occupation and you identified with, like, I am a police officer, or I am a lawyer, any of this other kind of stuff. Like, say I am a police officer and that's what my mind identifies with. Well, now as long as I'm doing that job, I feel great. Maybe 10, 15, 20 years, but then maybe I need to retire, or maybe I get injured or I get fired, and now maybe I'm a taxi driver. And the mind doesn't identify with I am a taxi driver. The mind identifies with I am a police officer. And now you feel lost or confused or uncomfortable in that kind of situation because the mind doesn't identify that way. Or say you're at a restaurant and two tables over, somebody's talking very positively and they say, all Americans are lovely and kind and warm and gentle. I've never heard this before, but this might be something that you could potentially hear, right? Like that could happen. And if you identify that way, you could be like, wow, they're talking about me, right? But then two tables over, somebody could be talking in disparaging and degrading ways about the nationality that your mind is identifying with. And now you're going to feel angry or frustrated. You might be ready to fight because now they're talking about me, right? Well, what the Buddha is teaching you is that this is just standing in your way of experiencing peace and joy. That as long as you cling to this personal existence, to this body and this mind, or as long as you cling to this self-image or this self-identity, then it's only a matter of time before your mind gets shaken up. So there's something I'm going to teach you tomorrow, which is a solution for this and how to eradicate this out of your mind. And it takes time, it takes time to gradually eradicate this out of your mind. But nonetheless, this is one of the fetters that the Buddha is teaching you. And you're going to need to eliminate this, where you can get to the point where you understand that this body was born in a certain country, for example, but you don't have to adopt that as your identity. Or you can understand that there is a body and we need to take care of it, but I don't need to identify with this as who I am. So then when I get gray hair or wrinkles or other things like this, then you're not shaken up by that. But if you cling to this and you want this to be permanent, then when it starts changing, you'll struggle and have difficulties there. So there's a solution to uproot this out of the mind. The second fetter is called doubt. What doubt is where you have doubt about the Buddha, the teachings, the community, your teacher, or your own ability to get to enlightenment. And you probably have doubt right now. You might doubt whether the Buddha even lived. You might doubt whether this enlightened mental state is actually possible to attain. You might have doubt about the Buddha's teachings. And if that's the case, that's completely normal. I had an enormous amount of doubt when I first came to this path. But you don't eradicate this doubt through blind belief or faith. That's not how you get rid of it. The way you get rid of it is through investigating the teachings. So you can take this doubt that you have right now and you can harness it. You can roll up your sleeves. You can sink your teeth in and say, yes, I do doubt the teachings of the Buddha. That's not where I am right now, but maybe that's what you're thinking is, yes, I doubt the teachings of the Buddha. And you know what? I'm going to dig into them and see if they're actually true. Because the more you examine them and investigate them, you're going to find out that they're true. Because as you're learning them and independently verifying them, you're going to see that. And as you start practicing them and you start seeing the quality of your mind improving and the quality of your life improving, you'll get to the point where you have no doubt whatsoever about these teachings. So gradually, slowly but surely, you can investigate and examine the teachings, and that's what's going to lead to your eradication of your doubt, where you'll have no doubt about the Buddha, the teachings, the community that you're part of, your teacher, and your own ability to get to enlightenment because you're actually doing it. You can actually see that the mind is improving, and you have confidence. You have confidence in the Buddha, you have confidence in his teachings, confidence in the community that you're part of, because this community is going to help you, right? When you see people practicing the teachings in a certain way, like you see people being generous and kind and respectful and polite, you'll learn from that. You'll learn from me, but you'll learn from other people too, and you'll kind of see that example. So you'll start having confidence in the community of people that you're part of. You'll start having confidence in your teacher because you can see that the teachings that they're sharing with you is helping you and guiding you to a better existence, a better mind, a better life. And then you'll have confidence in your own ability to get to enlightenment because you're seeing your mind improve and you'll know that you're headed in that direction. You won't be enlightened by the time you eliminate your doubt, but you will be pretty far on the path and you'll notice, like, wow, the mind is actually experiencing quite improvement. Then there's something called wrong behavior and observances. What this is there's certain behaviors that you're doing in the unenlightened state that are unwise, that are harmful, that are causing harm to others in terms of your speech and your actions and maybe your livelihood as well. And as long as you're putting out harmful behavior and conduct, that harm is going to come back to you. So by the time you get rid of the wrong behavior, part of this particular fetter, you will have cleaned up your moral conduct in terms of your speech, your actions, and your livelihood to what you see in the Eightfold Path. When I teach you that tomorrow, the Buddha is going to teach you moral conduct that doesn't cause harm to others. And by the time you get rid of this fetter, you will have cleaned up that part of your conduct. And you will see drastic improvements in your life because of having cleaned that up. So as long as you're putting out harmful conduct, the harm is just going to come back to you. So you need to shut this down. The way that I think about it is it's like a pipe of oil. And if that pipe is spewing all over the world, then you would like to shut that pipe down so that then you can go clean up the oil, right? So that's the same thing here is that you like to shut down your unwise and unbeneficial moral conduct. But it's not just going to be a snap of a finger that you could do that. You would need to have gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress. So it's going to take you some time to clean that up. You need to first learn about what is wise moral conduct, which I'll help you to see tomorrow in a way that you can independently verify. They're not rules or commandments. It's helping you to understand harmful conduct that is going to produce harm to others, and then this harm comes back to you. So first you need to intellectually learn it. You need to reflect on it to verify it, and then you need to gradually integrate it into your life. And this can take quite a bit of time. Then there's something called wrong observances. It's part of the same fetter. What the wrong observances is that if your mind believes that rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship leads to some beneficial results in your life, then you're not going to actually be able to eliminate this fetter and actually make your way to enlightenment because it's not the rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship that is leading to an improvement in your life. It's the cultivation of wisdom. So by the time you get rid of that part of the fetter, you will have seen very clearly what the mind needs is wisdom. And you need to be able to learn, reflect, and practice. And that's what's going to cultivate the wisdom. Whether you choose to do rites, rituals, ceremonies, or worship or not, it's totally up to you. Everything in life is up to you. It's not up to me to tell you what you should or shouldn't be doing. But by the time you've eradicated this particular fetter, you will know inside your mind that it's not rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship that's leading to beneficial results in your life. But maybe you're part of a family group and maybe at a holiday, everyone's going to the temple or the synagogue or the church or the mosque or something like this. And maybe there's some rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship going on. But you know in your mind that that's not what's going to lead to cultivation of wisdom, and that's not what's going to lead to improvement in your day-to-day life. Whether somebody does it or not, or whether your family or friends do it, or whether you're there while it's happening, that's up to you to decide. But your mind will have gotten to the point where you've seen clearly that these things don't lead to improvement in your day-to-day life. And oftentimes, before someone even comes and studies with me, they've actually already eliminated that part of the fetter because they know that I don't do rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship. And oftentimes, they've already seen the truth about that and they're interested in studying with me because they know that I don't do those kinds of things. So perhaps you've already eradicated that part because maybe you've done those things growing up as a child or something like that. And you can see, like, yeah, it didn't lead to any particular beneficial result. Then there's central desire and ill will. What central desire is this is where you're longing, yearning through your sense bases, wanting permanently agreeable contact. So through your eyes, your ears, your nose, your tongue, the body, and then the mind itself, the mind wants things to be permanently pleasing. And when you experience contact through those things and it's pleasing and agreeable to you, you'll get pleasant feelings like happiness, excitement, elation, thrill, exhilaration, euphoria. But when you experience contact through these sense bases that is disagreeable to you, your ill will potentially arise, where there's anger, hatred, and bitterness or animosity towards others, because the mind is perceiving that the problem is external. So, for example, if you were at a stoplight and someone comes up with music next to you that is particularly something you care about and you really like that particular music, you might be dancing in your seat and be like, yeah, that's my jam. All right, come on, let's go. All right. But now you pull up to the next traffic light and somebody else pulls up with some other kind of music that you don't like, right? This is the contact that you're getting through your ear and inside your mind because of that central desire. You're like, oh man, I don't like that music. And the mind perceives that frustration and agitation is coming from the other person, when in reality, it's coming from your own central desire that you're having agreeable and disagreeable contact, and now your ill will is arising. But you can get to the point where you don't see it as agreeable or disagreeable. It's just contact. And when you hear that music that you prefer, it's like, sweet, yeah, that's my jam. All right, let's go. But now when somebody else comes up to you with a different kind of music, it's like, all right, well, they're having fun. This is not a big deal. Hey, they're going to be gone in 3 minutes. No need to get frustrated or agitated about this. But with central desire in your mind, you're going to be experiencing contact through these sense bases, and you're going to see it as either agreeable or disagreeable. And then you're going to have feelings of either pleasant feelings or painful feelings based on this central desire. And when you're experiencing painful feelings, one of the things that can arise is your ill will, your bitterness and harshness and hostility or animosity towards others. So these are the lower fetters, and there's tools and techniques to eliminate all of this. And the foundational teachings that I'm teaching you this week will actually help you to be able to eliminate these as well as the other fetters as well. So these are the higher fetters. There's desire for form and desire for formless. This is where an individual has the desire to exist in this world, where there's this longing, yearning. Desire for form is where you desire to be in one of the form realms, like animal realm or the human realm. That's the form realms where there's physical form. But there can also be desire for formless, where the mind is having this desire, this longing, yearning to exist in maybe the heavenly realm. That's a pretty common thing that people want to exist in heaven with God, and they think that that's an eternal thing and a permanent thing. Or there's some people who might be interested in existing in one of the other formless realms, like hell or the afflicted spirit realm. It's pretty rare, but there are people who are interested and wanting and longing, yearning to be in the hell realm, right? So if you have desire to exist in one of these realms, then that's what these fetters are. Then there's conceit. What this is the arrogance, the pride. This is the measuring and comparing, thinking of yourself as superior or inferior to other people. This is actually coming from our animal existences, that in the past we had to have conceit in order to exist in our animal existences. We wouldn't have been able to survive without that. So, for example, when we were a pack of wolves, we needed to know who's the alpha male and who's the alpha female, because they're going to teach us how to hunt and they're going to teach us how to be wolves and how to survive. And if we didn't know who they were, we wouldn't have been able to learn those things. Or when we were in an elephant herd, we needed to know who's the matriarch of our herd, because she's going to show us where the food is. She's going to show us the migration paths. She's going to show us the watering holes. And if we didn't know who the matriarch of our herd was, we'd be out randomly roaming in the jungle and we wouldn't be able to survive as an elephant. But when we come into this human realm, our mind has this conceit where we're looking for this pecking order. When you go into a social situation, you might be measuring and comparing, right? Like, so what do you do? Where do you work? Oh, you're a lawyer? Well, I'm a corporate lawyer, right? You're trying to put yourself above other people, right? And this is the mind's ego and the arrogance, right? You're kind of trying to measure and compare each other. But you can get rid of this, because this is actually hindering your ability to reside with other beings harmoniously. As long as you're measuring and comparing other people, you're going to feel uncomfortable in certain situations. There's going to be certain people you talk down to And there's going to be certain people that you look up to, and you might be shaken up in these situations. When you go spend time with your boss, or maybe a political figure, or maybe a celebrity, you might be shaken up and unsteady and uncalm in those situations. And you would like to get to the point where you just look at everybody equally. One of the examples I use is like where I live in Thailand. There's a king of Thailand, and we like to have a nice king who's making certain wise decisions. And we also have people who sweep the street outside and sweep the sidewalks and stuff like that. You can get to a point where you view all these people as equal, right? That one isn't more important than the other. That yes, we like to have a king that's making wise decisions, but we also like to have clean streets too. And we can treat all these people equally. So that when you walk down the street and you see the king, you can say hello to the king. Hey, nice to see you. And you can do the same thing with the street sweeper too. And you can just get to a permanent practice where you're treating everybody equally. Where when your mind has to switch, you have to think who's below me and who's above me, and you treat one group of people one way and another group of people the other way, your mind oftentimes gets confused about who you need to treat how. And now you have conflict and difficulties. You would like to just look at everybody equally. So while we perform different roles, we have different lifestyles, we're all equal. Doesn't matter what our income is or our social status or our position in society. We can just look at everybody as being equal, right? And this will help you to have more harmonious relationships. Then there's restlessness. This is where the mind is shaken up, it's confused. If you ever sit and you like bob your knee like this, or you like tap your fingers, this is actually what's going on in the mind. And we're able to see it in the body because the mind is overactive, it's restless, and then the body is going to sit here and just kind of bounce and bounce and bounce and bounce or tap with your knee. So you might have some kind of restlessness in the mind where you can't just be calm and steady and stable. But by the time you get to enlightenment and you eradicate this, the mind will be just steady and stable at all situations. You won't have that overactivity in your mind. Then there's ignorance. This is like the fetter of all fetters. This is the whole reason why all the other fetters even exist. That this is the lack of wisdom. This is the confusion. This is the misunderstanding. While some people refer to this as ignorance, I like to use the phrase unknowing of true reality. Because remember, we're translating from the words of the Buddha that he originally spoke into English. And this word ignorance doesn't really describe how a Buddha speaks, how an enlightened being speaks, because you wouldn't refer to someone as ignorant. That would be unwise to do that. And an enlightened being isn't going to do that. And surely a perfectly enlightened Buddha isn't going to do that. But instead, it's this unknowing of true reality, this lack of wisdom, this confusion, because the mind doesn't understand what it doesn't understand. So, for example, the mind doesn't understand the Four Noble Truths. It doesn't understand the Eightfold Path. It doesn't understand that there's even pollutions in your mind. It doesn't understand meditation. It doesn't understand the cycle of rebirth. It doesn't understand the natural laws of existence. It doesn't understand the natural law of karma. It doesn't understand wise speech and how to interact. It just lacks wisdom. And because of its lack of wisdom, all these other pollutions continue to stay in the mind. And that's why the teachings of the Buddha aren't based in belief, because the way that you eradicate ignorance is to cultivate wisdom. And you can't get to wisdom through rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship. You need to learn, examine, investigate. You need to reflect, independently verify, and then you need to practice. So getting rid of ignorance, there's a certain intellectual aspect to it where you're intellectually developing, but ignorance is in the mind if you're not actually practicing the teaching. If you think back to when we were children, intellectually, we might have understood that using drugs and alcohol was unwise, but we didn't have enough wisdom to not do that. Maybe we still chose to do that to a certain degree. That's because of our ignorance. So getting rid of ignorance isn't just an intellectual pursuit, it's actually practicing the teachings as well. This is where there are people that can know whether someone else is enlightened. This is pretty common in Thailand that people know whether you're actually enlightened or not. They can see through your practice. It's not through your intellectual learning. There is a certain part of that that needs to happen. But if you're not practicing the teachings, there's still ignorance in the mind. So this is the last fetter of all fetters. This is the last one that's going to get eradicated. If any of those other fetters are in the mind, there's still this unknowing of true reality or lack of wisdom. Do you guys have any questions on the fetters? Yep.
One of the questions I have, when you look at insight meditation communities here in the States, like Spirit Rock or Insight Meditation Society, they have a lot of affinity groups, BIPOC, LGBTQ, Latino, whatever. And I'm not opposed to that. In a way, I see it as welcoming to all communities. But I can't wrap my head around the I components, like I am this, I am that. When you can teach us to in loving kindness meditation to go for may I be happy to may this being be happy. I don't understand how to wrap my head around those affinity groups with this identification of self.
Yeah, I'm not sure because I'm not familiar with those places, but ultimately you need to purge that from your mind. Where you might understand, like, I prefer, this isn't me now, but someone else could think this way. Like, maybe I prefer same gender relationships, but that doesn't determine who I am as a person. Someone could prefer that hey, I prefer same gender relationships, and other people might label that as LGBTQ community or what have you, and I might even participate in those kinds of events, but I don't have to adopt that in my mind as who I am as a person. Or you can understand that this being was born in this place called the USA, but you don't have to adopt that identity of who you are as a person. So this is where some places that are sharing these teachings, they don't understand that. They don't understand the universal truth of non-self, which is the solution. They don't understand personalized view. They don't even understand the 10 fetters, because what I'm teaching you guys is based on the original words of the Buddha, but very few places actually teach that. So you might have a environment or a community that considers what they're doing as Buddhist, and they might segment it out that way, which in my opinion, we don't do that in our community. It's just a community of practitioners. But even that, it's like, you don't have to identify with I am a practitioner. Like the whole idea, even like I am Buddhist, right? Like the Buddha wasn't Buddhist. He didn't have that identity in his mind because it didn't even exist. So there's a lot of identity that people are holding on to and clinging on to. But even though they're choosing to do that, you don't have to adopt that thinking in your own mind.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. I have another question on one of the other fetters. Can you go back a slide, please? So, for the sensual desire part, I like music. I have a Spotify subscription. Um, my thing is, I want to hear the things that are coming out to find my next favorite band. Is that attachment to a sense base of the ears? And do I need to overcome that to reach enlightenment?
We can't just take one thing and say, is this a craving or not? There's a few things that are like that, but something like what you're describing, music, you can't say that it is an attachment or that it isn't an attachment, because it's not the object itself. It's whether or not the mind is longing, yearning, and forming feelings based on it. So if you listen to music and you get so happy and excited and elated, and then you hear other kind of music, or maybe you can't listen to the music, maybe Spotify's down and you can't hear music and you get frustrated and irritated and annoyed. Now that is a craving, desire, attachment. But that doesn't mean you need to eliminate the listening to music. You can listen to music. There's no harm in listening to music. You just need to learn how to not form your feelings based on that music. And one of the things that we kind of talk about in the unenlightened state is that's actually the sign typically of a really good musical piece. And we think about it as art, that it does change the emotions in the mind because the mind is latching on to this thing, and now the emotions are changing based on listening to this particular thing, and there's a craving in the mind. So you don't have to eliminate your music. You don't have to eliminate having a Spotify membership and doing all these kinds of things. You just need to make sure that you're not forming your feelings based on that particular musical piece of where your mind is going to the pleasant feelings or the painful feelings. You need to come to the middle where you can learn how to enjoy something like music without forming your feelings based on it. And this is what the mind needs to figure out how to do, because it doesn't know how to do that in the unenlightened state. It can see very clearly, usually chasing and longing, yearning, and it can see very clearly like dull and lethargic, but it has trouble to see this middle way. So you would have to look inward, and this is where like a teacher can guide you in helping you to see your attachments, but we can't know 100% of every single attachment that you have. And that's where your mindfulness comes in, your awareness of mind. You need to be introspective and look inward and observe your mind during times when you're listening to music and times when you're not listening to music, and see, is there any discontent feelings associated with that? Because if there's discontent feelings, there is a craving, desire, attachment. There is central desire that's producing it. So just the act itself of listening to music isn't an indicator of whether there is actually an attachment or not. It's determined based on whether there's a longing, yearning, and therefore you're going to be discontent at some point.
So I guess just to follow on Andy's question, I think the sensual desire is basically because you're perceiving the world through the six sense bases: your eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. This pretty much applies to pretty much everything, right? Like food, and food basically has like multiple contact bases, right? Because you're eating it, you're smelling it, um, and things like even an attachment to money. You're like you're feeling of happiness when you see a bank account go up, or you're perceiving the weather because you're seeing was bright and sunny outside. You through the eyes, you're seeing that okay, I like the feeling of having a bright, sunny morning, and so you're feeling that. So how do we how do we actually get rid of that, or at least reduce that perception of the sensual desire that is so strong, um, and for many different people in many different ways. Like in America, half the conversations are about weather, because it changes so much. And then sports teams, like you get attached to sports teams or something. You talk about football all the time, and you have favorite teams, you have favorite, players, and that kind of also goes into personal existence views. So how do we think about having? I think that's also the question that was asked yesterday was that you would like to have a job and you would like to progress in your job, and but that's also sensual desire where you're trying to hold on to your job or your promotions because of you attached to money and all that kind of stuff, right? I guess the difficult part for at least for me is to understand how do you enjoy these things without being attached to it in a way that like you can have your mind be calm while going through all the ups and downs of weather or food or music and stuff like
Yeah, this is where the Eightfold Path comes in. That's your consistent, ongoing training to train your mind to eliminate craving, desire, attachment. So that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow, where there's all kinds of tools there, like meditation, like practicing mindfulness, like cutting off and letting go, all these different things. So that's where you'll be able to learn how to actually get the mind to the point where it's not longing, yearning, and basing its feelings on some condition. Or you're also not over here just dull and lethargic either, but you come to the middle way. So it's the Eightfold Path that is going to help you to eliminate all of these, but particularly central desire.
If you feel like maybe a loved one is practicing personal existence view or any of the fetters, I feel as if while you're trying to go on the path, in a way, I find myself sometimes having my own personal existence view by judging their view of having personal existence view. How do you eliminate that or interact in a loving way when you don't see the same way?
Yes.
View.
So what you're doing there, that's actually your conceit.
Conceit.
Yeah, your conceit where you're judging and measuring, comparing and looking at somebody else. So there's in volume 1, chapter 16, that whole chapter is devoted to helping you learn how to dissolve the ego and eliminate the ego. But you wouldn't be able to get to that without having first really well developed Eightfold Path. So you need to develop that first. And then in volume 1, chapter 16, there's proactive methods of how to eliminate the conceit. One of the biggest things is sleeping on the floor. I know this might sound silly for some people who are familiar with Asian culture, but just sleeping on the floor, like you can have a mattress, but getting rid of the elevated position where there's like a frame, a box spring, some people's beds are like super high. This promotes conceit in the mind. So just putting the mattress on the floor, this is going to actually be really impactful, but there's other things too. But going down into bed and getting up out of bed each day, this is going to really help the mind to get rid of its conceit, but you need other things besides that. But that's one that you can start with because it's really easy to set it up. It takes all of 3 minutes and then boom, you're going to reap the rewards of that for a long time. But you need to get the Eightfold Path well underway first. And then in chapter 16, you'll be able to see how to start gradually wearing away the ego.
David, I'm curious if you think these feathers have any positive value. I know we're trying to extinguish them, but I'm struggling with it because I think, in my mind, some of these emotions, like hatred or annoyance or anger, are emotions that are trying to guide us. Like, I hate my job, so I want to look for a new job. Like, do these values have any positive impact on our life at all?
There's nothing positive from these. When that hate is arising or that anger is arising, it's because something hasn't met your expectations, that you want something to be a certain way. So, for example, in the unenlightened state, there'll be certain people that you like and there's certain people that you dislike. Well, that's not from that person, and that's not an indication of anything other than the fact that your mind still has central desire, that you're expecting this person to be a certain way. And when they meet your expectations, you're happy. But when they don't meet your expectations, you get angry or frustrated or you dislike them. And if you understand impermanence, it's not possible. What you guys are going to learn tomorrow, impermanence, is that not everyone can meet your expectations. The problem is your expectations. That's the cause of these discontent feelings, and that's the cause of this dislike. So that anger and hatred and ill will, or any of those lesser versions, the frustration, agitation, annoyance, that's just like a red light on the dashboard of your car that's indicating to you that you have craving, desire, attachment in your mind. And when you get rid of that, you can actually get to a point where you like everybody. You can enjoy being with anybody and everybody. But the mind can't do that as long as it has central desire. And it's going to be the same thing with a job or working. So that's why, like, if someone's having difficulty in their job and they're choosing to leave, I usually spend time with them to make sure they understand what is it about that job that they dislike, because even they go get another job, it's only a matter of time before there's certain things they don't like about that job too, right? So you need to be able to make sure that you get rid of these longing, yearning, and expecting things to be a certain way, and you get to the point where you're making wise decisions, and you can gradually work towards developing a career or personal relationships. But as long as there's central desire, there's going to be ill will, and there's no aspect of these pollutions that are going to actually benefit you. Because when that ill will is arising, when that anger and hatred is arising, you're going to become unskillful. You're going to push people away. You're going to be bitter, harsh, and hostile. You're going to put your expectations on people and try to control them. And this means that you can't live with all beings harmoniously. But by the time you get to enlightenment, you can live with anybody and everybody harmoniously. You're welcome.
I want to go back to the definition of enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you can describe more of how that happiness and alignment feels like. Because for me, the hardest thing to get rid of is my attachment to happiness in my current state, right? I still get happy when songs come out or I got a promotion and things like that. And how is the happiness and alignment better than this, besides that it's more permanent, that I want to change, want to get to that state?
Sure. So the unenlightened mind experiencing conditional happiness, it's like we're bouncing off the wall. It's like, oh my goodness, yay. We're like bouncing off the wall, right? And then all of a sudden we fade away, and that fades away. The happiness that is in the enlightened mental state, I think of it as like cheerfulness, gladness, where the mind is uplifted, it's bright and it's radiant. You're not bouncing off the walls like you were with conditional happiness, but the mind is just always bright. It's always uplifted. A smile is very easy for you, and you can see the positive things in all things around you. Doesn't mean that you don't see the unfortunate things too. You see those, but your mind tends to focus on the positive things, and you can have this brightness, this cheerfulness, this uplifted mind. And you might laugh, you might joke, you might have fun, but it's not like in the unenlightened state where it's like those things, you like kind of bust out with all this happiness and excitement, but then it's only a matter of time. It's like, like the mind's like frustrated or agitated or annoyed. In the enlightened mental state, you can laugh, you can joke, you'll have fun, you'll enjoy life. Your mind is bright, glad, uplifted, and it's just a persistent mental quality. That's the difference between this feeling of happiness that arises, changes, and fades away versus this mental quality that's just persistent. It's ongoing. It's always there. It's easily accessible to you at all times during your day.
Thank you. That is very helpful. The other thing is the view about personal existence view, and ego and conceit. I actually read your book, chapter 16, about no self,
Mhm.
and I think that's just a very foreign concept actually for most of us. I did experience some sort of the boundary of self and the world kind of dissolves during meditation. But I wonder how it feels for you um, on a fundamental level. How does it feel to have no self?
Yeah, so this is one of the most challenging fetters for people to understand and eliminate, and it just happens to be the first one. But it's really challenging for the mind to understand it, what it is, and then how to eliminate it. So when you eliminate personal existence view, what you're going to experience is you no longer get frustrated or agitated or annoyed when people are commenting about this physical body or anything that your mind might have been holding on to. Initially, when you're getting to the point of realizing non-self and eliminating personal existence view, it can be very scary. It can be fearful because some of the things that my mind was holding on to is I am an entrepreneur, I am a businessman, I am wealthy, I am this, I am that, right? And now when I was starting to let all that go, realizing where I was headed, it was like walking off a cliff. But after walking off that cliff, it actually felt quite nice because now, because I wasn't holding on to those things, I was no longer hindered by them. I wasn't being bogged down because of them. And then when people commented either positively or negatively about this body or this mind, the mind was unaffected. So one time, Thai people are very friendly, very nice, but they say things that we wouldn't necessarily say in the USA. So like Thai people, when they talk about people, they will sometimes call you fat, right? And to us in America, we would never call someone fat. That's like a derogatory thing. But to Thai people, if you're overweight, they actually look at you fondly. They think that you're rich and wealthy because you wouldn't be able to sit around and eat food if you were like working out in the fields and you would like be pretty thin and working in the sun. So if someone calls you fat, it's oftentimes a compliment, but not typically, right? It's just, it can also be derogatory as well, but Thai people don't think about it as derogatory. So one time I walked out of my house and I was walking to the basketball court to spend time with my son. And my neighbor said, "Wow, David, you are so fat." And I was like, "Yep, sure am." And I just kept on walking. Right? Where at other times in my life, I would have been like, "What are you talking to me? Who are you? Who do you think you are?" Right? Like that would be a response from someone who has personal existence view. So getting rid of personal existence view, the result is you're peaceful, you're more joyful, because now these kinds of things don't shake you up. Right? Someone comes in and says things about whatever, you can just reside peaceful. Okay, I'm just going to repeat that for the people online. So the question was, why are the fetters sequenced the way they are, and are they organized in a certain way for a reason? So there's the lower fetters and there's the higher fetters, and this will actually transition us into what we're going to the 4 stages of enlightenment. So I'll explain this to you because it's going to answer your question. As you're eliminating these fetters, it's going to move your mind through the 4 stages of enlightenment. Prior to the first stage of enlightenment, you're going to be experiencing the jhanas. There's 4 preliminary phases called the jhanas that your mind is going to be experiencing enhanced qualities of mind. For example, one of the jhanas, in the second jhana, you're going to notice that there's no longer a subconscious mind. Like right now, if you're not in the second jhana or beyond, there's a conscious mind and there's a subconscious mind. The conscious mind is polluted, but the subconscious mind is actually heavily polluted. If you've ever been standing around talking with friends and you just blurted something out, you were like, "Why did I say that? I don't think that way. I don't think those kinds of thoughts. Why would I have said that? That was so silly." That's your subconscious mind, like throwing something up into your conscious mind, and you didn't think about it and you just blurted it out. That's because of your subconscious mind. By the time you get to the second jhana, there's unification of the mind or oneness of mind, where you have full awareness of your entire mind. And you won't experience those kinds of things any longer because you have full awareness of your entire mind. So there's these 4 preliminary phases where there's enhanced qualities, where you have mindfulness and concentration and focus, and there's other things like that that you'll learn when you learn about the jhanas. But then once you get to the first stage of enlightenment, we call this stream enterer. Nowadays, we just call it the first, second, third, and fourth stage of enlightenment. But during the lifetime of the Buddha, it was referred to as a stream enterer. And this individual is referred to as a stream enterer because if you get to the first stage of enlightenment, it's only a matter of time before you get to enlightenment, either in this life or some other life, because just like the log enters the stream and it's going to eventually get to the ocean, if you get to the first stage of enlightenment, you will get to enlightenment. It's only a matter of time, either in this life or some future life. Then there's something called a once returner, a non-returner, an arahant, and then there's a Buddha. A Buddha is not a stage of enlightenment, but I'll make sure that you guys understand what that means. So getting to the first stage of enlightenment, an individual would have eliminated the first three fetters. That you would have eliminated personal existence view, doubt, and wrong behavior and observances. This is like a certain level of development within your own mind. But none of these stages of enlightenment are something for you to take pride in, right? You're not going to put this on your Facebook page. You know, you're not going to call up your mom and be like, "Hey, mom, aren't you so proud of me? I'm a stream enterer," right? Like, you're not going to do that, right? This is like your own personal growth, your own personal development. This is like a plan for the Buddha, helping you to be able to see how to progress forward in your journey to enlightenment. So these first three are actually important to eliminate in order to be able to get rid of all the others. So that's why they're in a certain order. That you wouldn't be able to eliminate conceit, for example, if you didn't eliminate personal existence view first. You wouldn't be dedicated enough to practice all the other teachings and get to enlightenment if you still had doubt, right? So you need to get rid of your doubt. And then also, if you're going to clean up your unwholesome karma, if you're out there having wrong behavior and observances and putting out all these harmful bodily actions and speech and things like that, you're not going to be able to clean up your mind and your life enough. So he's putting them in an order for a reason, because typically you would like to focus on them in this order, but that doesn't mean you couldn't be working on conceit right now, right? You could surely be working on conceit. Or like ignorance. Ignorance is something that you're always working on. You're working on that right now, even though it's a 10th fetter and it's a higher fetter. So once you get rid of the first three fetters, that's where the mind enters into the first stage of enlightenment, and you will have significantly diminished your discontentedness. You will see that the anger and frustration or other discontent feelings that you once had, it's a mere fraction of that now being in the first stage of enlightenment. So you still get discontent, but it's not as much as it was before. It's a mere fraction of that. Then as you go to the second stage of enlightenment, referred to as a once returner, because in this stage of enlightenment, if you die, you will come back into the world one more time and you will get to enlightenment in that life. Where the first stage of enlightenment, if you die there, you're going to come back no more than 7 times. Right? So some of you might have been stream enterers, or some of you might have been once returners in the past. And now this is your opportunity to be able to get to enlightenment. An individual who's in the second stage of enlightenment has already eliminated the first 3 fetters, but now they've thinned out number 4 and 5, right? So thinning a fetter out means, like, for example, if you're noticing you're not as interested in sensual desire anymore, like maybe you notice that your interest in sex has declined. This is because the sensual desire is gradually being diminished, right? Because your mind isn't as so interested in forming your inner feelings based on those types of things. So naturally, as you age, you might notice your sensual desire diminishing. Where here in America, they tend to think that you're vibrant and healthy if you have a strong sexual desire. Well, yeah, maybe when you're young, you might have that. Some people don't, some people do. But as you age, your sensual desire is going to decrease. And that doesn't define who you are as a person. Sometimes we define ourselves in that way through our sexual relationship because of personal existence view. It's like, I am knocking it out in the bedroom, right? Like your mind can hold that as like a personal existence view, right? But you can get rid of that and realize that that doesn't define who you are. And you might actually notice that your sensual desire is gradually diminishing. And you don't have to relate that to whether or not you have a successful relationship or not, because that's not a determining factor of whether you're having a successful relationship or not. So if you're noticing that your sexual craving is diminishing, this could be because you're reducing some of your sensual desire in your mind. If you notice your ill will, like your anger and hatred, maybe in other parts in your life when you were younger, maybe you had a lot more anger and bitterness and hostility in your mind, but maybe now that's kind of diminishing. That's what it means to greatly thin a particular fetter. And in this particular stage of enlightenment, once again, your discontentedness has diminished significantly, but you're still experiencing discontentedness. Then there's the third stage, which is called non-returner. In this stage of enlightenment, you've eliminated the 5 lower fetters. And this individual is very rarely experiencing discontentedness, but they still experience discontentedness. It's like once every 2 months, once every 3 months, once every 6 months. It's very infrequent and it's very insignificant when it's occurring. And one of the things that can happen in this third stage is your mind can become somewhat complacent, where your mind is maybe not paying as much attention to the various things that you need to do because it's so insignificant and so infrequent that you're actually becoming discontent. You can go 2 months, 3 months, even 6 months with no discontentedness whatsoever. But then maybe you have 30 seconds of a little bit of ickiness in the mind. But by the time you get to the third stage of enlightenment, you'll know exactly what that is. You'll know exactly how to handle it, and you'll be able to eradicate it from the mind. So you need to be dedicated and diligent and vigilant when you're in the third stage of enlightenment, that you don't allow your mind to become complacent so that you can eliminate all the other fetters. Because in order to get to enlightenment, which is referred to as an arahant, this is an enlightened being. They've eliminated all the 10 fetters, and this individual doesn't experience any discontentedness whatsoever. It will have been 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. This person doesn't experience any discontentedness. In that stage of non-returner, if someone dies there, they will be reborn into the heavenly realm and they will get to enlightenment there. But ideally, you would get to enlightenment in this life where you've eliminated all the 10 fetters, and then you can enjoy the rest of your life with the peace, the calmness, the serenity, and contentedness with joy. So these are the 4 stages, and the Buddha organized it this way because it's like a personal growth plan, a personal development of this is kind of like the way you track your progress in making your way to enlightenment. There's something called a Buddha, or a fully perfectly enlightened one. We talked about this a little bit yesterday, where a Buddha will have gotten to enlightenment by themselves without the help of any teachers or any guides. They dedicate the rest of their life to sharing their independently discovered teachings with countless people. They then preserve their teachings in such a way that countless more people will get to enlightenment after their death. Those are the 3 main primary criteria of what makes a Buddha a Buddha. So you can see that you're not a Buddha. You're going to need help along the path. There's these other criteria as well that I shared yesterday about having a profound memory. We even talked about that today. There's the ability to quickly determine the condition of someone else's mind. That's something that a Buddha can do and help an individual to understand how to eradicate certain pollutions from their mind based on certain teachings. And then a Buddha is a living, breathing, walking example of their teachings. They're not going to be teaching one thing and doing something else. We might call this like you practice what you preach. But a Buddha isn't preaching, right? But that might be the way you think about it. Like a Buddha, if they're teaching right speech, they're going to be practicing right speech. And the reason why is because that's how their students learn, that they're going to learn just as much through their spoken words as they are through their actions. So a Buddha is going to be a living, breathing, walking example of their teachings so that their students can observe them and then actually learn and grow and develop in how to actually move their mind to enlightenment through observing a Buddha and how that person functions in the world. So this is referred to as a fully perfectly enlightened one, like I was mentioning, because there's no extra baggage around. Okay, this is not a stage of enlightenment. Some places you go, you'll hear people tell you that everybody is a Buddha, but the Buddha didn't actually say that. That's what people are saying nowadays, some people. But you're not a Buddha. The Buddha talks in his teachings. He says how rare it is that a Buddha exists in the world. The last one that the world's currently aware of was 2,500 years ago. The Buddha died in 483 BC, and the world isn't currently aware of an individual that meets these criteria since that period of time. So this is what a Buddha is, and you're going to need teachers and guides to help you along the way. Let's talk about what enlightenment is not. This is one of the ways to help you understand what something is, right? That's one of my teaching methods. I teach you what something is, and then I teach you what something isn't. What enlightenment is not is that if you experience these conditional feelings, then you know your mind is not enlightened. And remember here, the pleasant feelings, the happiness, excitement, and so forth, these are conditional feelings. By the time you get to enlightenment, you'll be experiencing unconditioned happiness and unconditioned mental qualities where the mind's always uplifted and cheerful and bright. So this is referring to conditioned feelings. You need to be able to see the conditioned pleasant feelings as just as much a part of the problem as the painful ones. It's pretty intuitive that you can understand that you need to eliminate anger and sadness and frustration and all those others, the guilt and shame and fear. That's pretty intuitive. But sometimes people struggle with, like, why would I eliminate like happiness? Isn't that what life's all about? What you're eliminating is conditional happiness, not the unconditional happiness. You're eliminating the conditional happiness, meaning I can only be happy if these things occur. That's what you're eliminating. And you need to see this as part of the problem. So, for example, if you get a brand new job and you get so happy with this brand new job and you're so excited because of this brand new job, well, that job is not permanent. So that means when the company goes out of business, when you get laid off, when something happens, when you're injured and you can't do that job anymore, you're going to be angry. You're going to be frustrated. So if you allow the mind to get the conditional pleasant feelings, when that condition changes, your mind's going to end up in the painful feelings. So the Buddha is teaching you how to eliminate the conditional pleasant feelings so that you don't have to experience the painful ones. And therefore, you can get to the unconditioned peace and joy where the mind's always happy. So you need to be able to see those pleasant feelings as part of the problem. We're going to talk about this more tomorrow with the Eightfold Path. If you have a craving, desire, attachment for other people to know that you are enlightened, you're not yet enlightened at that point, right? So like if somebody walked up to you and was like, hey, by the way, don't tell Vibhav, but I'm enlightened, right? You might hear this from someone, not here, you probably won't hear that here, but right, if you hear that, it's like you know right away, like this person is not enlightened. Because an enlightened being doesn't go around and like boast and arrogant and prideful and all these kinds of things, right? So if you're noticing that you have this longing, yearning to declare to other people that you're enlightened, then you know you're not enlightened, right? Because an enlightened being doesn't need to go around and boast and be arrogant. Because if you're peaceful, if your mind's joyful, if you're completely content, why do you have to go around and tell other people? Just go be peaceful. Just go be content. You don't have to come around here and tell us. Just go enjoy yourself. But in this situation, the person's maybe looking for admiration. They're looking for you to admire them or something like this. So they're still wanting something, right? Their ego is still in place. So if you have that desire, you know that you're not enlightened yet. If you have a complacency where there's a lack of motivation, there's a lack of initiative, there's a lack of willingness to do something or enthusiasm in the mind, then you know you're not yet enlightened. Because this is what the mind does, is it'll chase and chase and chase and chase after things, but then you'll swing all the way to the other side where you'll feel dull and lethargic or exhausted. You'll come home at the end of your day feeling exhausted from the things that you've done. And that you'll know that your mind is not enlightened. With an enlightened mind, your mind is not getting exhausted. You don't get tired. You get sleepy where you need to sleep, but you can maintain your energy all day long. It's a consistent, ongoing energy. So if you're noticing complacency or dullness or lethargic or lack of motivation or enthusiasm, you know your mind's not yet enlightened. So any questions on what enlightenment is?
I had a question. Can we go back to the stream enter, please? So the stream enter, it basically says that we have to eliminate wrong behavior, which is basically moral conduct in most cases, right? And so to what level, and it says you have to have a well-developed Eightfold Path. It doesn't really explain to what level you have to do that so that you are, that you know that you've eliminated wrong behavior, because you could still be, having some little bit of wrong speech, or you, I guess, or like little bit of the other parts of the wrong moral conduct could be like livelihood is not fully cleared up, or right action is not fully cleared up. So how do you know you have eliminated wrong behavior when there's still some holdups left from that's like not fully cleared?
So there's a level of detail in the Eightfold Path that is the moral conduct that the Buddha is referring to here. You would have brought your moral conduct up to that point. So for example, in right speech, in the Eightfold Path, he teaches to eliminate lying, slander, harsh speech, and frivolous speech. And all of these are based in craving, desire, attachment. So in order to get to the elimination of wrong behavior, you would not be lying, slandering, having harsh speech, or frivolous speech. But that deeper teaching of the 5 factors of well-spoken speech, where you speak at the proper time, what you say is true, gentle, beneficial, and with a mind of loving kindness, you'll still be having some issues with that because it's a deeper level teaching. But you'll have cleaned up your speech to the point of those four: lying, slander, harsh speech, and frivolous speech. And then the same thing with right action, that there's a certain level in the Eightfold Path of eliminating killing, stealing, sexual misconduct. You will have cleaned that up. And then there's right livelihood, where the Buddha teaches those 5 livelihoods and how to perform your livelihood, which we're going to talk about all that stuff tomorrow. Those are the things that you would have cleaned up. Because like something with livelihood, there's 2 folds of purification. There's the one first level, which is in the Eightfold Path, and I teach you guys that as part of that teaching. But then there's a second fold of purification that you haven't gotten to yet. But in order to get to the first stage of enlightenment, you only need to get to that first fold of purification. So it's very clear that you've eliminated wrong behavior and observances because you're practicing that base level of moral conduct from the Eightfold Path. You got some impermanence with the mics.
That they are a stream enterer, like, or because there's seven lives or 7 times. So if you're reborn, will they know that they're already a stream enterer? Number one, that's the first question.
Yeah, so 2 things here is that if you get to the first stage of enlightenment, you will know it. You're not going to stumble into that because there's a lot of intention and work that went into it. But say you die as a stream enterer, you're not going to come back in the next life exactly where you left off. Just like you have to still learn how to walk and read and write and all that kind of stuff, you still need to make your way back to the first stage of enlightenment, but it's going to be easier for you as having gotten to the stream entry in the previous life. Your next life, it'll be easier for you. So if you find it to be somewhat straightforward and these teachings are pretty, easy to understand to a certain degree, then you're like, yeah, you could have potentially learned these in a previous life. But if they're really cumbersome, they don't really make a lot of sense, you have to really work hard to figure it out, then this individual may not have learned in a previous life, but they still have to make their way back to that first stage of enlightenment. So they're going to know that they've gotten there, but then they're going to need to work their way back to it.
Will you still have, Teacher David, would you still have wrong speech if you are a stream enterer that came back again? I guess you would still have to work through everything. So you would still have wrong behavior in the beginning until you reach it again, and then hopefully accelerate it so you don't have to come back so many times.
Exactly. In this 7 rebirths, this is a maximum of 7. It doesn't mean you have to come back 7 times, but it could be that you were stream enter once or twice or 3 times, and then maybe on the 4th time you actually make your way all the way. But you can also, have never seen these teachings ever, and then you can make your way from the beginning all the way to enlightenment in that particular life as well. You're welcome. Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering on once returner, if you come back one more time, what is the purpose of having suffering in that one more time? If
you mean coming back to the world one more time?
Yeah, coming back to your last existence. Why would you need to have suffering in that existence to then complete enlightenment?
Yeah, so what's happening is each time you're gaining more and more wisdom. So that's why, like, if you get to the point of being a stream enterer, the reason why you're coming back into the world again as a human is because you've become a better and better human being. You've now evolved. During that life, you got to the point where you're no longer functioning like an animal, because the unenlightened mind functions very much like an animal. This is why people oftentimes talk about human beings as animals, but we're not. We're human beings. We're very different than an animal. Our consciousness is very different than an animal. So getting to that first stage of enlightenment, you've learned and developed to a certain degree where you're not going to be reborn down into the lower realms ever again. And now you've learned and cultivated enough wisdom to continue to be reborn back into the human realm, for example. So the once returner, having gotten to that stage of enlightenment, you've cultivated your mind to a certain degree, but there's still some residual clinging. There's still some things that you need to learn that you haven't quite developed yet. So you need to come back into the world one more time in order to be able to experience the cultivation of wisdom and actually get to enlightenment. So that suffering, while we don't need it and it's not required for us, we can opt out of it. It helps us to be able to see where we still have work to do. So if you were frustrated or agitated or annoyed about something, then you can see that, and that's helping you to see what is your cravings, desires, attachments, and where's the work that I need to do to sort out the rest of this so I can learn what I need to learn about this world so I can escape it and move on.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this, and I was curious. You said that the Buddha did not necessarily believe in things, but he instead relied on natural evidence and his insight. And this seems to all hinge on the idea that he found reincarnation and the concept of reincarnation to be true. And I was just curious, my question for you is, what insights did he find in his work and in the natural world that you said he didn't believe, but led him to know that reincarnation was true?
Sure. So in his teachings, he describes his past lives and having described what those were, but you won't see him describing like this is how I actually independently verified this. But in the teachings that I share with you, because I've observed past lives, I share with you 17 different criteria of how to independently verify the cycle of rebirth. Some people refer to it as reincarnation. That's a common word that people use, but it's important to understand the distinction that reincarnation refers to a soul that is being constantly coming into the world, and it's the same permanent soul that exists, and it's just in a new body. So those people think that this soul is permanent, and each time it comes into the world, into a new body, it's the same actual being, just with a different body. But that's not what the Buddha actually taught. He didn't teach that there is a soul or there isn't a soul. And he didn't teach that a soul exists, and he didn't teach that it was permanent. He didn't teach that we are the same individual being every single time. He taught more what I refer to as the cycle of new existence. And we typically translate this as the cycle of rebirth. But there actually isn't anything that's being reborn. The word that he used is samsara. And the best way to think of that is the cycle of new existence. So I can share with you 17 different things. If you look at volume 11, chapter 105, you'll be able to see 17 different things. But I'll just share a couple with you right now. Have you ever experienced deja vu? Okay, so these are residual memories that are coming to the surface of your mind that you know that you didn't experience that in this life. This is the residual memories from your previous life or lives, right? And there's other things like this. Have you ever known anybody that's like 6 years old? They've never seen a piano in their life, and they walk over to a piano and they lay their hands on it. They can play masterful piano. This is because of the residual memories from their previous lives, right? So there's a lot of evidence of the cycle of rebirth, but people aren't really piecing it together and seeing it that way. Instead, they're believing that they only have one life because they haven't yet seen their past lives. But if you're really interested in this topic, I suggest you go to volume 11, chapter 105, because you're going to see the 17 different criteria. But in the teachings of the Buddha, you'll be able to see that he did talk about previous lives, and he described some of his previous lives, but he, at least in the content that we have, because we don't have everything that he taught, the content we have, we don't see a listing of exactly how he did it. But I explained how I did it in the book series, so you can see it in that chapter.
Does this mean that every animal in existence right now was at one point human?
Not necessarily. We move in and out of these realms at all different times. None of them are permanent. Sometimes we're taught that hell is permanent or heaven is permanent. But when you understand the universal truth of impermanence, you'll be able to see that that's not true, because that's a natural law that we can see that these things aren't permanent. But it doesn't mean that every animal has been a particular being at any one particular time. The Buddha does share, though, that every being we come in contact with has previously been a family member, has either been our mother, father, brother, sister, son, daughter, or some other relative, because we've all had so many countless rebirths in the past. So maybe when we were lizards, you and I were sisters or something like that, right? And maybe when we were monkeys, maybe you were my stepfather or my grandfather or something like this, or maybe you were my brother when we were snakes or something like that. So this actually helps you to be able to then cultivate loving kindness for everybody around you. So rather than looking at people as strangers, you can look at it as like family members, of people you haven't met before. Because if you walk out into the world with the perception that strangers are bad and I can't talk to strangers, this is going to inhibit you from having that joyful, bright, and uplifted mind where you have harmonious relationships with everyone around you. One of the things you're doing on the path to enlightenment is you're changing your perspective and how you relate to the world around you. And this particular teaching is really helpful so that when you go out into the world, you can smile at people, you can be cheerful with people, you can say hello to people. And right now, if you've been taught that people are strangers and you hold on and cling to that perception, it's going to inhibit you from having really rewarding and wonderful relationships. And if we held on to that perspective of strangers are bad and don't talk to strangers, well, the only people we would ever talk to is our parents, because everyone else is essentially unknown to us when we're born into this world. So we need to get rid of that conditioning of mind and thinking that strangers are bad, and just think of it as like these are individuals that we haven't met before. They're our family members that we haven't met before. And when we're in Thailand, we actually talk, and I think this way when I'm around people, is when in Thai language, when I go into a store, like maybe there's a elderly person behind the cashier, I think of this is my grandmother. And I talk to her as if this is my grandmother. And in Thai language, we actually refer to her as if she's my grandmother. I will use the pronoun for grandma. When I talk to her, I'll say, Grandma, can I get some mango and sticky rice? Right? And that's the way you talk to her. If you're talking with a food server, it's like, hey, brother, sister, can you bring me a glass of water? Right? So even though here, if you talk to people that way, they probably look at you odd. But at least if your mind thinks this way, this will help you.
Thank you, first of all. Thank you. Does the proximity of people that you encounter in your day-to-day life to yourself, can that potentially be a determiner in the proximity that they that you encountered them in a previous life? Like, say, oftentimes people say romantically, like, I feel like I met you in a past life. Mm-hmm. Does that hold any weight or relevance?
Yeah, the Buddha teaches that depending on what you've done in a previous life, you can be reborn into another life around people that are similar and familiar to you from a previous life. It's not necessarily in the exact same role, but it can be similar. So like, I know that my grandmother in this life, she was my mother in my previous life. And my grandmother's brother was her husband in her previous life. These are things that I know. But that doesn't really have any weight or bearing other than the fact that you just know that that occurs. And the Buddha teaches you that's one of the reasons, among others, to treat the people around you with love and kindness and compassion and respect. Because if you experience rebirth, you're going to essentially be reborn with these same individuals in the future, but not exactly, right? There's some people that are around you that you've never encountered before necessarily, but he does describe how everybody at some point in your life, in your previous lives, have been your relatives at some point. So he does talk about rebirth and kind of being reborn among the similar people, but it doesn't mean they were in the exact same roles.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And remember, the goal is not to be reborn. That's not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to get out of here, right? It's like, peace out, I'm out of here. See you guys later. Right? Okay. All right, I think that's everything for today on this particular topic of enlightenment and what is enlightenment. I think you guys can see that it helps you to be able to understand where you're headed and what you're working towards. As you get closer and closer to enlightenment, you'll understand this more because you'll start experiencing more and more of the qualities of enlightenment. But perhaps now at the end of our conversation, you know more about it now than you did when we start. But just understand you don't know everything about it at this point, but you're going to learn more and more about it as you go. We're going to take a lunch break, and when we come back, I'm going to teach you guys Buddhist chanting. So we're going to actually be chanting together. We're going to break out these sheets, and I'm going to help you to be able to understand how to do the Buddhist chanting. So let me take a look at the time so I can give you guys an update. So it's 1 o'clock. So let's see. We finished class at 3:30. So if we should be able to do this in an hour. So if you guys would like to take an hour and a half lunch break, we can still get back at 2:30. And then that way we can go from there. Okay, so thank you guys for your questions. Thank you for the discussion, and I'll see you guys in about an hour and a half. Okay? Yeah, you're welcome.